Is the human mind capable of reaching such a breaking point that one takes up arms with the intent to end another's life? Current events demonstrate that it is. It's hard to imagine a more cruel and senseless act of aggression. How difficult is it to trust those around us when an ordinary neighbor could turn out to be a genuine maniac thirsting for blood? Our planet is home to many compassionate individuals who believe in a bright future and are ready to help without expecting reward. However, it also has plenty of those who gladly exploit others' goodwill, and sometimes this leads to extreme manifestations of cruelty. Ingrid Boiana do Silva was born on the 25th day of the 4th month of 2001 in the megacity of São Paulo, Brazil. From early childhood, she was distinguished by her quiet nature and thoughtfulness. At the same time, the girl was sociable enough to surround herself with a large circle of friends and easily find common ground with new people. Her family characterized her as a charismatic, attractive person who paid great attention to her appearance. Ingrid preferred unusual clothing, experimented with bright hair colors, and wore noticeable makeup. Her approach to creating her image was unconventional, yet aesthetic. This style harmoniously complemented her vibrant life. The young woman was passionate about cosplay, video games, and regularly embodied the images of her favorite characters. Thanks to this, Ingrid became part of the gaming community while still in school. She was a regular participant in major themed festivals and conventions. It was natural that the young woman immersed herself so deeply in the virtual world. By age 19, she had achieved expert-level mastery in Call of Duty Mobile. This game had captured the hearts of countless gamers across all continents. Among them was Ingrid, who performed under the nickname Soul. Her skills allowed her to become a member of a professional women's team. From then on, she participated in competitions where she showed impressive results. By the time she reached 19, Ingrid had already dedicated several years to gaming and managed to rise to legendary status, not limiting herself to tournament performances alone. The young woman also passed on her experience to beginners. Ingrid devoted many hours to training to improve her own skills and enhance team play. At the same time, her range of interests extended beyond just Call of Duty. After completing high school, she became a nursing student. The girl had always been distinguished by her empathy. She sought to be helpful to those around her. She demonstrated these traits in her attitude toward relatives and friends. Ingrid was strongly connected to her family. She had formed sincere relationships with her parents. The young woman systematically spent time and maintained contact with friends of both genders. However, not all aspects of the main character's life in this story were cloudless. At 16, she experienced emotional trauma caused by a romantic relationship. Ingrid began searching for a partner and struck up an acquaintance with a young man through Tinder. Initially, everything developed normally and naturally, as is typical for young lovers. The couple exchanged messages online. After 7 days of active correspondence, Ingrid concluded that her Tinder acquaintance was suitable for her. It was worth trying to create something serious with him, so they planned a personal meeting. That evening, the young woman returned later than usual, and her family began to worry, especially when they couldn't reach her by phone. Despite everything, she did come home, but was hysterical. Ingrid informed her family that her internet acquaintance had actually assaulted her. This incident shocked everyone, caused serious emotional trauma, and even undermined family harmony. Her mother and father worried about their daughter's safety and tried to protect young Ingrid from a repeat of such incidents. However, due to her passion for video games, she couldn't completely give up the internet, and disagreements with her parents caused some cooling of relations. But by the time she reached 19, everything had normalized. To overcome the consequences of emotional trauma, the young woman began visiting a specialized clinic where psychotherapy specialists worked with her. Although it was difficult for her to trust people again, especially strangers, overall Ingrid managed to restore her normal rhythm of life. At the same time, it remains unknown whether the young man from Tinder who committed the crime was detained and brought to justice. After that event, the young woman immersed herself even deeper into the virtual reality of video games, as it was there she found solace and the ability to abstract herself. As a rehabilitation method, this proved effective, and it also brought her recognition and stable income through professional achievements. Because she still had significant obstacles in romantic relationships with the opposite sex in reality, Ingrid found solace in virtual space. There she gained numerous friends who posed no threat to her safety, maintaining contact with these people while staying out of danger. It was in the virtual world that Ingrid met a young man named Guilherme Costo, who played under the nickname Flashlight. A friendly relationship developed between them. During their acquaintance, he lived in Pirituba, one of São Paulo's districts. About 390,000 residents live there. The young man lived in a small dwelling with his mother and brothers. Their father left the family after the birth of the third son, Guilherme himself, who was the youngest. The mother had to completely immerse herself in work to provide for her children. Because of this, she couldn't give them proper attention. The children were mostly left to their own devices. It's quite likely this played a significant role in future tragic events. In childhood, Guilherme didn't stand out among his peers. In public, he kept quiet and inconspicuous. Relatives knew him as a loving brother who gladly helped his mother with household chores. For a long period, he was a parishioner of the local religious community. Moreover, his religiosity went beyond ordinary faith. After several years, the young man completed theological courses and dreamed of being ordained as a pastor to conduct services. But, as in Ingrid's story, not all sides of Guilherme's life were problem-free. From an early age, the boy suffered because the head of the family had left. This caused deep resentment in him toward parents who abandoned their own children. Online, he actively demonstrated his negative perception of such people. He repeatedly expressed himself in categorical terms, wishing for stronger legal norms regarding such citizens. The young man was convinced that criminal prosecution could prevent such situations, through which a father or mother could be imprisoned for a long period, even applying the death penalty as punishment for such an act. But even this didn't exhaust the traumatic episodes of his biography. In 2019, his brother passed away due to an overdose of psychoactive substances. At that time, they lived in the same room, so Guilherme was the first to discover the lifeless body. This incident affected him so much that the young man began to doubt his own religious convictions. From then on, he stopped being interested in theology and stopped attending church. In his soul, disgust began to grow toward Christian faith and religious teachings in general, which he now considered deception. At 16, the situation only worsened, as the student faced bullying at his educational institution. The exact reasons for the harassment remain unknown, but Guilherme's brother had to intervene in the situation. The older young man had a harsh conversation with those responsible for the bullying. Although the harassment stopped after this, Guilherme's emotional trauma was serious. From then on, he became even more reclusive, choosing exclusively dark clothing and even planning to leave the family, so he ran away, but was soon forced to return as he had no funds for independent existence. The family lived modestly, and his mother, who earned money cleaning, couldn't provide him with material support, and the young man himself had no income yet. Due to lack of funds, they couldn't afford psychotherapy services. Thus, the only available method of emotional support for him became video games. The student chose Call of Duty Mobile, just like Ingrid. The young man dreamed of reaching professional heights in esports and becoming part of an elite team. However, his skills and activity were significantly inferior to the girl's abilities. Being at an average gaming level, he couldn't make it onto the team where Ingrid performed. Instead, he was accepted by a weaker collective that regularly suffered defeats. However, the young man's virtual activity wasn't limited to this. Growing outrage at life's injustices pushed Guilherme to visit unpopular internet forums with questionable content. During this time, he became an active participant in movements that propagated hateful and aggressive ideas, among which were quite well-known and threatening groups. At the same time, the young man denied direct participation in the Brazilian forum that gained notorious fame as a platform for planning crimes. Simultaneously, the young man devoted many hours to studying the criminal acts of psychopaths and serial killers. Among his idols was Anders Breivik, the person responsible for the deaths of 77 people in Norway in 2011. Due to his pathological fascination with serial killers, people turned away from Guilherme and filed complaints against him. This led to him coming to law enforcement's attention several times, but no compromising evidence was found on the young man, apart from excessive interest in the topic. He only observed such activity online, not demonstrating deviant behavior in reality, which is why he couldn't be held accountable. However, something more serious was already brewing. The young man kept disturbing records, which he shared exclusively with online acquaintances. He called them "my diary," but behind this name hid his dark essence. In the notes, he revealed his contempt for all humanity, particularly singling out Christian women. He felt hatred toward his own family, considering his mother and brother naive hypocrites. At the same time, he saw himself as a soldier in a war against Christianity, believing his purpose was to prove God's non-existence through violent actions, including armed attacks on churches. There he also wrote that his main tool of influence and manipulation was lies. He sought to use deception as a means of demonstrating contempt for humanity and forcing people to do his will. The diary pages contained numerous disturbing entries, among which were confessions that Guilherme heard voices urging him to kill relatives and commit other brutal crimes. At the end, he noted that the voices had ordered him to create this manifesto, dictated its content, and the young man was unable to resist them. At the time of writing the diary, Guilherme led a double existence. To his family, he was a pleasant, friendly young man who continued to care for his loved ones, including his niece, mother, and brother. But in the online environment, he was a genuine madman who planned and promoted violent acts. Unfortunately, his mother had no suspicions about this and was powerless to do anything. Besides the fact that Guilherme masterfully deceived her, even if she had discovered his psychological disorders, there was no longer any possibility of providing the necessary help. She couldn't send her son to a medical facility due to lack of funds. Ingrid and Guilherme's acquaintance occurred in December 2020 during a Call of Duty mobile match. They played on the same team along with other players from different cities. This wasn't a professional tournament or official championship, just an amateur game. When the girl found out that her gaming partner lived in the same city, she decided to establish contact. Ingrid was distinguished by her sensitivity to others' difficulties, which the manipulator instantly recognized. He began approaching her gradually, using lies and playing on sympathy. The girl was touched by stories about how his father abandoned his son, how his beloved brother passed away. Ingrid felt no romantic feelings toward him, only a desire to support and help. She wanted to remain friends with Guilherme, but he had completely different plans. Later, the young man expressed interest in a romantic relationship, but she didn't share his feelings and rejected his advances. The young man pretended not to be offended, and their friendly relations continued. The young man became increasingly frank, especially after learning about Ingrid's medical education. The girl didn't tell her parents about her new friend, but began sharing with friends. One day, Ingrid talked to her ex-boyfriend Alan, informing him that Guilherme might have connections to dangerous organizations. The ex immediately questioned these claims, but he was interested in why she maintained contact with this strange person at all. He had a bad reputation spreading about him, but the girl insisted she saw good in him and wanted to help overcome his depressive state. Circumstances gradually became more complicated. Guilherme began sending Ingrid photos where he posed with weapons. He claimed it was airsoft equipment. She showed these photos to Alan, who began expressing increasing concern. The ex warned that it was better to stop communicating with this person and stay as far away as possible, but Ingrid continued to insist that he just needed support. He complained about depressive disorder, begged her not to stop communicating, claiming that his new friend was the only thing that gave meaning to his miserable existence. Unfortunately, this worked. Out of sympathy, the girl continued contact, not realizing that Guilherme was luring her into a trap. The first personal meeting of the new friends took place in January 2021. They spent time in a São Paulo park. The young people talked all day, while Ingrid ignored messages from family and Alan. The second meeting took place at the young man's home, where they had lunch and played together. At that time, his mother was home. Ingrid hid the truth about Guilherme from her family, as her traumatic experience at 16 had led to her parents still being extremely vigilant about any personal meetings. But the girl was convinced that with Guilherme she was in no danger. To get her parents' permission to leave the house, the girl resorted to deception. She said that Guilherme was her classmate who was helping her with practice at the medical educational institution. From that moment, the young man regularly sent messages, convinced that a romantic relationship had developed between them. The girl categorically denied this, while the young man responded with ambiguous statements about how everything would end soon. The true meaning of these words was revealed much later. Throughout the entire period of communication, Guilherme shared with the girl his intentions to carry out an attack on a religious building. Ingrid came from a family of believing Christians and made efforts to convince the young man to abandon this senseless violent act. In response, the young man claimed he intended to obtain firearms soon to realize his plan. Repeatedly in correspondence with Ingrid, he wrote about the possibility of using weapons against himself to end his suffering in such an extreme way. The girl tried to convince him to abandon such thoughts. It seemed that the young man derived satisfaction from the girl's care and attention. It's a known fact that she told these disturbing stories to her friend named Alan. He was seriously concerned, but at Ingrid's request, kept everything secret. The concern intensified when Alan noticed that in recent weeks Ingrid had become noticeably sad and withdrawn. The young man assumed the reason might be the behavior of her new acquaintance or his destructive influence. In mid-February 2021, the girl didn't attend work or classes. She was at home with her family in self-isolation, waiting for COVID-19 test results. On Friday, February 19, Guilherme insistently invited her to visit his home, but the girl refused because the test results weren't ready yet. On February 22, Monday, his insistence became more aggressive. He tried to lure her with cunning, making up a story about paying a friend for a tattoo. The young man convinced her that payment included a tattoo for her too, but Ingrid still doubted, as she hadn't yet received the test results. Then the young man applied his usual tactic of emotional blackmail, trying to evoke sympathy. Guilherme claimed he felt unwell. Allegedly he urgently needed support. He had to talk to someone, as he was on the verge of suicide, and it didn't matter to him whether she was sick or healthy. Despite concerns about the pandemic situation, the girl yielded to this plea, wanting to help her friend. The day before, in correspondence with Alan, she expressed concerns about whether everything would be alright, and just in case, said goodbye to him. He understood the possible connection with Guilherme, but Ingrid avoided detailed explanations and ended the dialogue. On the morning of Monday, February 22, 2021, the girl again misled her parents. She said she was going to educational practice. Instead, she went to her internet acquaintance's home. At approximately 10 in the morning, Ingrid arrived at the location. Guilherme's mother was still home, getting ready for work. All three had breakfast together. Later, Ingrid took a photo together with Guilherme and sent it to Alan. She reported that she was fine. At 10:30, the woman left for her shift. Guilherme's younger brother was also in the house, but he too soon left to deliver food orders, after which the correspondent's friends were left alone. The young man immediately led his guest to the room where his brother had passed away in 2019. According to event reconstruction and the young man's own testimony, they just talked for some time. The young man dulled the girl's vigilance, then seized the moment, pulled out a large blade like a machete, and attacked Ingrid. He inflicted 5 deep wounds on the victim, trying to decapitate her. When this failed, he used a firearm. No defensive injuries were found on the girl's body, the attack was sudden. After committing the crime, the murderer didn't calm down, he filmed the victim's body on video, accompanying the recording with obscene comments about her. The killer behaved calmly, showing no signs of remorse. Guilherme distributed the recording via WhatsApp and published it on his social media page, including in the gaming team participants group, but no one believed him. This enraged the young man, He began filming himself against the background of the body, making obscene gestures, but this time too the video didn't have the expected impact. The young man couldn't understand why everyone thought it was edited. He paid special attention to the radical groups he was a member of. His behavior resembled attempts to gain their approval. But they didn't believe him either. Then the young man recorded another video, continuing to insist that he had killed the girl. He also reported the existence of a diary with a detailed description of criminal plans, where Ingrid's murder was listed as the first of them. After this, Guilherme stole a car and drove to a neighboring town. Within an hour, he called his brother and confessed to the crime. The relative didn't believe at first, as his brother often joked about dark topics. Less than an hour passed after the crime when the family managed to persuade Guilherme not to take his own life, but to contact law enforcement and surrender if he had really done something like this. After that, the young man headed to the police station. His elevated mood caused distrust. They didn't immediately believe him. When police asked about the motive for killing Ingrid, the criminal replied that he wanted to implement the manifesto recorded in his diary. The killer's brother returned home around 2 in the afternoon. Finding Ingrid's mutilated body in the house, he immediately called police and medics. Of course, it was too late to save the girl. Guilherme's mother returned from work another hour later when law enforcement representatives notified her. The woman witnessed the victim's body being carried out of the house. She was in shock, refusing to believe in her son's ability to commit such an act. However, the evidence proved irrefutable. A problem arose with establishing the deceased's identity. Law enforcement found a backpack with the girl's personal belongings, but there were no documents there. The criminal's family didn't know Ingrid's real identity. The entire time, the young people had been deceiving their families about each other. In the backpack, they managed to find only the address of the girl's aunt and grandmother. Several police officers were immediately sent to them. Thanks to the relatives, they established that the deceased was 19-year-old Ingrid Boiana, and 18-year-old Guilherme was taken into custody. Subsequent events unfolded quickly. The victim's family saw Guilherme's video recordings, which were rapidly spreading online. The killer was under arrest but gained popularity among his comrades from radical groups. He didn't deny guilt, on the contrary, he willingly described the details of the attack, seeming to savor every detail. In testimony, he claimed he had been preparing the murder for 2 weeks. His words were confirmed by a manifesto titled, "My Diary," where the killer laid out his hatred for humanity and intentions to commit cruel crimes. According to his statement, he took Ingrid's life because she was in his way. Investigators gained access to the killer's and victim's phones, paying special attention to their correspondence. However, Guilherme had carefully cleaned his device, deleting a large number of files. Despite this, numerous disturbing images and recordings were found. Considering the young man's behavior and cruelty, suspicions arose about his mental state, so a psychiatric examination was ordered. By September 2021, Guilherme was definitively recognized as competent and fully aware of his actions during the murder. The conclusion stated that the young man had signs of psychopathy, lack of empathy, and other mental deviations, but this proved insufficient to avoid criminal responsibility. The killer's lawyer intervened in the case, engaging an independent psychiatrist for an alternative diagnosis. In this specialist's opinion, Guilherme had antisocial traits and personality disorders that didn't allow him to stand trial. However, this conclusion wasn't accepted as evidence. Initially, the defense tried to achieve mitigation of guilt through insanity. They relied on Guilherme's own claims that he heard voices. But later this strategy was abandoned, since in case of being found insane, legislation provided for hospitalization in a psychiatric facility instead of imprisonment. According to experts, such punishment could prove even more severe. In such a case, there would be no fixed treatment term. Forced detention in a medical facility, besides, would provide for assessment of Guilherme's danger level to society every 3 years. Guilherme's trial was postponed twice. In March 2022, due to documents under consideration, the prosecution claimed the need for additional time to develop tactics. In May 2022, another postponement occurred due to the absence of witnesses who would meet the necessary criteria. Only on August 8 of that year did the killer finally appear before the court. As a result of the proceedings, he was sentenced to 14 years imprisonment for first-degree murder. Additionally, he had to undergo mandatory psychiatric treatment and examination before release. Ingrid's relatives were stunned by the lenient verdict. The family believed the criminal deserved a much longer prison term. Under his statute in Brazil, one could receive up to 30 years imprisonment. But the court took into account his young age and absence of prior crimes. However, the case wasn't definitively closed, as many questions remained about third parties' involvement in this bloody event. In 2023, information appeared proving that the criminal didn't act independently but became an object of online manipulation. 4 people were identified as such who developed the crime plan and pushed Guilherme online: Gabriel Valeras, Carlos Eduardo, William Santos, and Vier Souza. All of them were detained, but final results are still unknown. The young men are under investigation. It's only known that one of them made an extremely unpleasant phone call to Ingrid's father, mocking his daughter's death. Against the background of all this contradictory data, it still remains unclear who Guilherme really is. Is he just a traumatized young man who lost self-control and became a victim of manipulators? Or a psychopathic manipulator himself who used lies as a tool to achieve his base goals? Law enforcement officers who worked with the young man noted a striking contrast between how he laughed while telling Ingrid's story and showing the video, and how he showed remorse and almost cried during the verdict announcement. This crime shocked Brazil and especially all people who were close to the innocent victim. The girl's family was particularly devastated when the video filmed by Guilherme after the murder gained wide distribution. The criminal's mother repeatedly gave interviews to journalists, expressing the deepest apologies for her son's actions. She begged for forgiveness from the Boiana family, claiming she had no suspicion of raising such a monster. The woman didn't recognize her kind, caring son. Please write your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. For those who are new here, subscribing is the best way to stay updated on future content. Also give a like please. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Thank you for your support during this difficult time. Until next time, friends.